Indian startups. Are they the future tech powerhouses we envision? Or just really good at delivering your biryani? Okay, let's unpack this. This is a question that's sparking serious debate right now, you know? You, our curious learner, have brought us a mix of articles, even a lively online discussion, all because of recent comments from Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal. So we're diving deep into what's really happening in the Indian startup world.
It is fascinating, isn't it, how one seemingly simple question can open up, well, such a complex and crucial discussion about a nation's entire innovative direction. Minister Goyal basically asked, is India's startup energy all about consumer-facing tech, those lifestyle apps, all the delivery services we use every day? Or are we seeing a real push towards deeper, more foundational innovation? Like, are we aiming for the really big, groundbreaking stuff?
Exactly. He did not hold back at Startup Mahakumbh, not one bit. He actually questioned whether India, with all its potential, all its talent, is aiming to just satisfy itself with fancy ice cream and cookies. And yeah, those were his words. And those apps that bring every craving right to our door, I mean, come on. Who doesn't love a little bit of that convenience, right? But then he drew a comparison to Chinese startups, which, at least from his perspective, are heavily invested in deep technology. Stuff like electric vehicles, the whole battery tech scene, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, robotics, global logistics, and of course that underlying deep tech and infrastructure that makes it all possible. And his big question, it's got people talking, are we going to be happy being delivery boys and girls? It's a powerful image, right?
It is. It definitely makes you think.
It does. And so your mission, learner, is to cut through all the hype, all the noise. We want you to walk away with a clear picture. Where do Indian startups really stand today? What's holding them back from venturing into those deeper tech waters, those areas with massive global impact? And just as importantly, what is the government actually proposing to do about all of this? We'll be looking at perspectives from Business Today, the Hindu Business Line, the Indian Express. We're even going to dive into, well, the completely unfiltered opinions on Reddit, all to give you those aha moments.
I love the Reddit deep dives. You never know what you're going to find in there.
You really don't. So start with those initial reactions. What did people have to say about Minister Goyal's comments?
Well, the initial wave, especially if we look at places like Reddit and that Business Today article, seemed to be all about, I'd say, defending the current focus on consumer-focused startups, at least viewing it as like a necessary step in India's overall technological journey.
Okay, so like a stepping stone.
Exactly. They weren't necessarily saying it's the end goal, but more like, hey, this is a critical phase we're going through. There was this one really interesting Reddit thread, for example. They looked back at India's recent tech history and they broke it down into phases. First, you had the call center era, which, let's be honest, got a lot of flack at the time. But they argued that was actually phase one, a super important period. It gave millions of Indians English language skills, exposure to global work cultures. It was a foundation.
Right. Building those core skills.
Exactly. Then you had the IT boom, which they called phase two. This is where India really started to establish itself as, a major player in the global tech scene, providing software services, building complex systems, things like that. And now they're suggesting we're in phase three.
Phase three, okay. This is where those consumer-focused startups come in.
Yeah, exactly. This is the phase where India is, tackling its unique challenges head on using technology. All those diverse apps and services that are popping up everywhere, solving everyday problems, they're saying it might look like chaos from the outside, but actually it's a sign of progress, like a country finding its own way in the digital world, coming up with solutions that work for India.
So for you, learner, the initial takeaway here is, I think, a sense of pride, that we're addressing our specific needs through this kind of consumer-focused innovation.
It is inspiring to see so many entrepreneurs tackling these challenges head on, finding creative solutions.
Totally agree. I remember that thread too. It was really insightful. Someone even made the analogy of building digital plumbing. Like, even if it's for ordering food or groceries, it's a foundation. And you need that before you can start constructing those really complex high-tech buildings, right?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. They were arguing that these current startups, even though they might not be focusing on deep tech breakthroughs, they are building a digital infrastructure and also addressing, the everyday needs of millions of people. But this whole initial defensive wave, it quickly transitioned into something else. A discussion about, the very real obstacles that are making it hard, really hard, for Indian startups to move to that next level, that deeper level of innovation.
Because, let's be clear, it's not that Indian entrepreneurs lack the ambition to go into those deep tech areas.
No, not at all. There's plenty of talent and drive.
Yeah. The commenters, especially on Reddit, they highlighted something else. They pointed to structural limitations. They were saying true innovation, especially in fields like semiconductors or advanced AI, it requires a specific kind of environment, a cycle of experimentation, failure, adaptation, learning from mistakes. And the concern is the current environment in India, it places a huge amount of risk on the shoulders of these young entrepreneurs, often without the robust support systems they need to really thrive.
So while there's pride, there's also this underlying concern that maybe the system itself isn't quite ready to fully support those more complex, deep tech ventures.
Right. And this leads us to some of the, I would say, quite disheartening experiences that people shared. I remember one commenter who talked about their registration process. They were trying to register their company, and it just turned into a nightmare. The MCA portal, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs portal, it was unreliable. Investors were getting nervous because things were taking so long. And then the unbelievable part, their company name. Something as simple as XYZ AI PVT Ltd was flagged for disrespecting the emblem. Can you believe that?
I mean, that sounds, I don't even know what to say. It's almost comical.
It is, but it's clearly a huge headache for anyone trying to build a company. Disrespecting the emblem. It's like a plot from a bad bureaucratic satire, but it's their reality. And that was just one story. Later on, we're going to hear from actually a semiconductor startup founder who has, let's just say, even more tales of red tape, the kind of stuff that just sucks the life out of innovation.
And I think that really underscores a point made earlier. Building a thriving deep tech ecosystem, it's not something you can rush. It takes time. It takes investment.
It's a long game.
It is. You need patient capital. You need world-class research-oriented universities, the kind that are actually churning out top talent in these really specialized fields. And you need a density of expertise, people who've been there, done that. These are long-term investments, systemic changes. It can't just happen overnight, because of a weekend hackathon or a sudden funding boost. It needs a sustained effort. So against this backdrop, right, you have Minister Goyal's challenge, and then you have these on-the-ground realities. What is the government actually proposing to do? Where do we go from here?
Well, Minister Goyal did announce a pretty significant financial commitment. He spoke about a substantial allocation specifically for deep tech within the existing 10,000 crore fund-of-funds scheme. This was covered quite prominently in the Hindu Business Line, if you want to check it out, learner. The specific goal here is to really nurture the development of all those cutting-edge technologies he mentioned. Things like, AI, robotics, quantum computing, machine learning, precision manufacturing, even biotechnology.
Right. It's definitely a sign that they're paying attention to these areas, recognizing their importance. And what's really interesting is the Small Industries Development Bank of India, SIDB, has been specifically tasked with making sure that smaller startups, the ones who are just starting out, get priority when it comes to distributing these funds.
Okay, so trying to level the playing field a bit.
Exactly. The first installment, which is set to be released this year, is 2,000 crore. And a big chunk of that is earmarked specifically for seed funding. And, crucially, deep tech innovation.
So the idea is to provide that initial boost, that early stage financial support that can help these potentially game-changing ideas get off the ground.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about funding to scale up prototypes, to invest in research and development, which, let's be honest, in deep tech can be a long and expensive process. And ultimately, it's about helping these innovations actually reach the market, getting them out there.
Making them a reality.
Absolutely. And the fund, it's specifically targeting sectors that are known for, needing a lot of time and resources to develop, things like AI, ML, quantum computing, robotics, biotech, even semiconductor design. So they're being quite strategic about it.
So it sounds like a pretty comprehensive approach on paper, at least from a funding perspective.
Yeah, it does. It shows that the government is, actively thinking about how to cultivate a strong pipeline of, I guess you could say, homegrown technology solutions that can address national needs and potentially, position India as a real leader in innovation on the global stage. They've even promised to set up a dedicated helpline and a desk specifically to address startup concerns, which, on paper at least, could help with some of those bureaucratic frustrations we talked about earlier.
I mean, that helpline could be a real game changer. But, and I think this is a big but, it has to be truly effective. It has to actually cut through the red tape. Because we did get a very different perspective, a really powerful and honestly quite personal account from a founder named Murtaza Amin. His open letter, which was featured in India Today, it painted a much less optimistic picture of the support system that's actually in place.
Right. His story was quite sobering, wasn't it? Murtaza Amin, who runs an IT services company in Burhanpur, Madhya Pradesh, he basically took the step of, writing directly to Minister Goyal. He outlined the harsh realities he's facing every single day just trying to run his business. And his challenges, they weren't about, a lack of innovative spirit or anything like that. They were about the very basic struggles of doing business in his location. Things like, can you believe this, the lack of reliable 247 power and the constant, relentless bureaucratic harassment. He actually said it made him feel like a third-grade citizen in his own country.
And what was even more concerning, at least to me, was that his repeated pleas for help to both the Prime Minister's office and Minister Goyal's office, they were completely ignored. Not even a response. He went on to detail how he was routinely forced to pay bribes, actual bribes, to multiple local departments, the municipal authorities, the GST department, the PF organization, the electricity board, just to keep his business operating.
That level of corruption at such a basic level, it's incredibly disheartening. Because it's not just about the money, it's about the time and energy it takes away from actually building a business. And the fact that it's so normalized, it just shows how deep-rooted some of these issues are.
And it makes you wonder, how can any deep tech innovation possibly flourish when the basic ecosystem for just surviving as a business is so flawed?
It raises some really fundamental questions.
It does. And then we have the story of the semiconductor startup founder on Reddit who echoed a lot of these same frustrations. But from the perspective of someone specifically trying to innovate in a high-tech domain, and their account, it was quite shocking, to be honest.
It was incredibly detailed, wasn't it? I mean, this wasn't just someone venting. This was someone who clearly had a deep understanding of the system, and they were laying out the challenges very systematically.
They really were. And the level of detail they went into, it was almost overwhelming, but so important to hear. This founder, who has decades of experience, a proven track record of designing profitable chips for clients in the US and Europe no less, including someone known as the father of AI, they had made the difficult decision to just give up entirely on pursuing Indian clients, both private and government, because of what they perceived as a lack of genuine commitment. And their experience with government RFQs, requests for quotation, it was particularly damning. They were basically told, you invest crores to build it, and then maybe we'll decide if we want it. Or, even worse, we're not going to commit to buying it. You go figure out if there's a market for it first.
It's like they're being asked to take on all the risk, all the financial burden with absolutely no guarantee of any return.
Exactly. And for a startup, especially in deep tech, where the development cycles are long and the costs are high, that's just not sustainable. And then they went on to talk about their experience trying to engage with the defense sector.
Which you'd think would be, a natural fit for a semiconductor company.
You would think. But they faced resistance, even when they were offering solutions to clearly identified problems. I mean, it just highlights the incredible internal obstacles that exist.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about getting contracts. They talked about how easily a business can fail in India just because of bureaucratic hurdles. And the story they shared was really alarming. They had a tax break application, it was delayed for 2 years, then they were asked for additional documents and basically thrown back to the end of the queue. And then, to top it all off, they got a call from a facilitator, offering to expedite things for a fee, of course.
It's just so disheartening to hear. It paints a very disturbing picture of a system that seems vulnerable to corruption and inefficiency at every level.
And on top of all that, they talked about the significantly higher import costs they face for essential resources like compute power, EDA licenses, raw materials compared to, what they would pay if they were operating outside of India. And then the burden of all these new compliance requirements, numerous, seemingly arbitrary. It just adds layer upon layer of complexity. I mean, they even mentioned the requirement for a 10,000 WPC approval just to import a simple $10 wireless device.
It's mind-boggling. And then, let's not forget the issues with, faulty government portals that lead to financial losses through delayed refunds. It's death by 1,000 cuts.
It really is. And this founder's plea, I think it really resonated with me. They were basically saying, just let us focus on building world-class products. Get out of our way. Provide good governance, a stable environment. That's what we need. It's about clearing the path, not just about dangling the possibility of funding at some point in the future.
I think that's a really important takeaway. So we've heard a lot of individual stories, But let's zoom out a bit. What about the broader context of the Indian startup ecosystem? What are some of the big picture observations?
Well, there were some really interesting analyses and articles from the Indian Express and also from Vivek Kaul, a well-known economist. They pointed out that, the vast majority of Indian startups, they're primarily focused on serving the domestic market with online services, things like e-commerce, food delivery, grocery delivery, ride-hailing, even online betting. And while some of these have grown into, quite large companies, their potential for global scaling, it's inherently limited by the fact that a huge percentage of the Indian population has limited discretionary spending.
So even though we have these so-called unicorns, companies valued at over $1 billion, they might be giants within India. But their ability to expand globally, to compete on a global scale, it's hindered.
Right. They're kind of trapped within the boundaries of the Indian market. And the articles contrasted this with China, which has, on the one hand, built massive global businesses in online services like TikTok, Alibaba, Shein. But they've also become, the world's dominant manufacturing hub for technology. So they've kind of mastered both sides of the equation.
They have. And the comparison in deep tech, it's pretty stark, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. China has over 6,000 deep tech startups with something like $100 billion in funding.
Wow, that's a huge number.
It is. And India lags behind significantly, facing, as we've discussed, a real funding crunch in this sector. Even in the SaaS sector, software as a service, where India has seen some international success, that success is often attributed to, labor cost advantages, rather than fundamental, groundbreaking innovation. And while UPI, the Unified Payments Interface, has been a remarkable success in digital payments, the challenge of effectively monetizing it, it's still there.
It's interesting, though, because some of these sources, they also pointed out that China's initial startup boom, it was also heavily focused on domestic online services, so maybe India is just following a similar path. But the key question then becomes, how quickly and how effectively can we make that transition towards a strong focus on deep technology?
Right, because China did eventually manage to make that shift. So can India do the same? And if so, how? There were also some interesting responses from some prominent startup leaders like Zepto's Aadit Palicha, FraudPay's Ashnir Grover, and InfoEdge's Sanjeev Diktandani.
Right. They weighed in on the debate as well.
They did, and their responses, they tended to defend the current ecosystem, highlighting its achievements in terms of job creation, attracting foreign direct investment, things like that.
So showcasing the positive side of what's been built so far.
Exactly, but they also acknowledge the gaps, the lack of capital, the lack of dedicated support specifically for deep tech ventures. And, Palicha even made the argument that building great internet companies, it's actually a necessary foundation for developing large-scale AI models down the line.
So there's this idea that even these consumer-facing startups, they could be contributing to that deeper tech ecosystem in the long run.
Yeah, that's the argument. But then you have Vivek Kaul's analysis, which really brings up a fundamental issue. India's relatively low investment in R&D, research and development, as a percentage of its GDP compared to countries like China, the US, Israel, it's significantly lower. And that, it raises some questions. Because startups, they don't exist in a vacuum. They're a product of the larger ecosystem. And if that ecosystem doesn't incentivize original research, long-term innovation in these deep tech areas, if it doesn't encourage risk-taking, then it's going to be really hard for those startups to truly flourish.
Right. It's about creating the right conditions for innovation to happen.
Exactly. But amidst all this, there was also a call for a more ambitious vision. Amitabh Kant, who's been a key figure in India's policy landscape, he made some really strong statements, as reported in the Economic Times.
Right. He's known for his, let's say, bold pronouncements.
He is. He urged Indian startups to set their sights higher, to aim for global tech leadership, not just imitating Western models, finding our own path.
So a more independent, self-reliant approach.
Yeah. He specifically emphasized the importance of Indian startups building what he called sovereign frontier models, leveraging our unique data sets, our own indigenous data, to avoid the biases that can be inherent in, technologies that are developed elsewhere.
So building our own tech with our own values, our own perspectives baked in?
Exactly. And he called for a quantum jump forward in critical deep tech sectors, things like space technology, battery technology, drones, green technology. He even held up ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, as an example, as a prime example of cost-effective innovation. He was urging startups to adopt a similar mindset, achieving more for less.
So really pushing for a leap forward, not just incremental progress.
Right. So, learner, where does this all leave us? We've covered a lot of ground here. I think the big takeaway is the Indian startup scene, it's incredibly dynamic, it's full of energy, it's adept at addressing immediate consumer needs. But there's also this tension, a recognized need to move beyond that, to focus more on fundamental research and development, especially in deep technology.
And that tension, it's reflected in everything we've discussed. The initial defensive reactions, the stories from founders on the ground about the real-world challenges they're facing, the government's response, the funding announcements, the promises of support, it all paints a picture of a system that's in transition, a system that's trying to figure out how to make that leap, from delivering biryani to, building those foundational technologies that can really shape the future.
And it's going to be a fascinating journey to watch. What happens next? Will those funding announcements translate into real change on the ground? Will those bureaucratic hurdles be dismantled? Will that helpline actually help?
Those are the big questions. Can India truly become a global technological powerhouse, primarily by optimizing our delivery services and creating trendy consumer apps? Or does it require something deeper, a more profound, more challenging transformation? One that tackles the fundamental issues of research, funding, the very ease of doing truly innovative business. We want to hear your thoughts, learner. What stands out to you as the most critical factor in shaping the future of Indian startups? What questions has this deep dive raised for you about innovation, about economic development, about India's place in the world?
Because this is a conversation that's just getting started.
Yeah.
And your perspective, it matters.
It really does. So share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive insightful and you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. For more in-depth explorations like this, we've got a lot more coming your way, so don't miss out.